The night was heavy with a suffocating silence when my daughter Sarah showed up at my doorstep, her cries echoing in the stillness. It had only been 3 months since she tied the knot, and I could hardly fathom what could have gone wrong. As I opened the door and saw her standing there, my heart plummeted. Her face was unrecognizable, swollen, and marked with bruises that painted a horrifying picture of her recent life. I was utterly speechless, my mind racing to comprehend the sight before me. What on earth happened? I gasped, my hands instinctively reaching out to pull her into my arms. As she collapsed against me, I felt her trembling body, and the weight of my helplessness crashed down on me like a tidal wave. I ushered her inside, the warmth of our home contrasting sharply with the cold reality of her situation. As she recounted her story, my anger bubbled to the surface. The more I listened, the more I trembled with rage. How could this have happened to my precious girl? Was the promise made to her, the vow to love and cherish her, merely a facade? The truth of her experience ignited a fierce determination within me. I swore to seek revenge on those who had inflicted such pain on her. Let me introduce myself. I'm Jessica, 49 years old, and I went through a divorce when Sarah was still a child. Raising her alone while juggling a full-time job was no easy task, but I was determined to provide her with a loving environment. Despite her reserved nature, Sarah possessed a strong spirit and an unwavering work ethic. Through sheer perseverance, she landed her dream job, a feat that filled my heart with pride and hope. Her presence in my life has been my driving force, a beacon of light during my darkest moments. So when she came to me one day, her eyes sparkling with excitement to say she wanted to introduce me to someone special, my heart leaped with joy. This was a pivotal moment in her life, and I felt a rush of happiness for her. The man she introduced me to was Richard, a dashing figure dressed impeccably in a suit that spoke of his professional success. He was 7 years older than Sarah, and as he greeted me with a cheerful smile, he radiated sincerity. However, I was taken aback when, barely after introducing himself, he made his intentions clear. "I've come to ask for your blessing for Sarah and me to get married," he said. Sarah was only 23, and they had been dating for a mere 6 months. I had expected a casual meeting with her boyfriend, not an earnest proposal for my blessing. "Well, you're both still young. Don't you think it's a bit early to be thinking about the future?" I gently suggested, my motherly instincts kicking in as I tried to protect her. Richard, however, straightened his posture, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that demanded respect. "I can't think of anyone but Sarah anymore. I believe I'll never meet another wonderful woman like her," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. Hearing his heartfelt plea, coupled with Sarah's hopeful gaze, made me reconsider my initial reservations. "Mom, please," Sarah chimed in, her voice filled with determination. "We really want this." If they had made up their minds, who was I to stand in their way? Moved by their passion, I found myself nodding, granting my consent for their union. "Thank you so much. I promise I'll make Sarah happy," Richard exclaimed, and I couldn't help but smile as I watched the two of them exchange glances filled with love and hope. Yet, as Richard left and the door closed behind him, a flicker of unease ignited in my heart. Was I making the right decision? Wasn't it all happening too soon? I had heard that all parents experienced mixed feelings when their children prepared for marriage. Deep down, I had imagined Sarah's marriage was still a distant event, and maybe I just wasn't ready for it. But seeing how happy they were together gave me a glimmer of hope. "It'll be fine," I reassured myself, trying to quell the nagging doubts in my mind. As the wedding approached, I met Richard's parents, and everything seemed to progress smoothly. Both families were eager and excited, especially since Richard and Sarah were their only children. Richard's parents, having always desired a daughter, seemed to adore Sarah, which made me feel more at ease. "Mom, I'm thinking of living with Richard's parents after we get married," Sarah shared one evening. I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, it was lovely that they had taken a liking to her, but on the other, I was concerned. "Are you sure about this? I don't have experience," but I've heard that living with in-laws can be challenging, I replied, my worry evident. Sarah reassured me. I get along well with his parents, and with Richard there, I'm not worried. Her confidence soothed some of my apprehensions. After all, their family home was only a 20-minute drive from mine, so I felt comforted knowing I could reach her quickly if needed. Once the wedding ceremony concluded, a new chapter began for Sarah as she settled into her life with her in-laws. I imagined her bustling around, filled with excitement as she embarked on this journey. However, about a month later, I noticed something troubling. The regular messages I had received from Sarah dwindled, and my attempts to reach out went largely unanswered. I hesitated to interfere too much, but my concern continued to grow. Finally, I decided to call her. To my surprise, Richard answered the phone. "Mother-in-law, what's the matter?" he said, his voice calm, yet carrying an undertone that made me uneasy. "Could I speak to Sarah?" I asked, my heart racing. "She's in the bath right now." "Don't worry, she's doing fine," he replied, his tone leaving little room for discussion. Before I could press for more information, he hung up, leaving me feeling more worried than before. Days passed, and still no messages or calls from Sarah came through. Feeling a sense of urgency, I resolved to see her in person. Richard's mother had always welcomed me to visit, so I took the weekend to go to their family home, hoping to ease my anxiety. As I approached their house, a sense of unease settled over me. When I pressed the intercom, Richard's mother responded curtly. "Sarah is out with Richard." Her tone offered no further explanation, and I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. What was happening to my daughter? Where was she? In that moment, a knot of fear tightened in my stomach, and I knew I had to find out the truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and I was determined to uncover what was happening behind the closed doors of my daughter's new life. My heart raced as I resolved to protect her, no matter what it took. I was filled with unease as I stood outside Richard's family home, unsure of what to do next. "I'm sorry for coming suddenly," I said, trying to sound calm. "Do you know what time they'll be back?" I asked Richard's mother through the intercom. All I received in return was a heavy sigh. "You should call before coming. I don't know when they'll be back." Her point was valid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. With a heart full of apprehension, I turned to leave, wondering if perhaps I was worrying too much. Yet a persistent feeling gnawed at me. Richard's demeanor and his mother's attitude seemed different now, almost hostile compared to how they were before the wedding. I couldn't shake off this nagging feeling that something was deeply wrong. After deliberating for what felt like hours, I decided that hearing Sarah's cheerful voice might ease my worries. I called her workplace, only to receive shocking news. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Sarah has already resigned," the HR representative said. I could hardly breathe. "What do you mean she resigned? When did this happen?" My voice trembled with disbelief. "Just a few days ago. We're actually in a bit of trouble because her departure was so sudden," they explained. I felt my heart drop. Sarah had been ecstatic about her job, her dream job. We had cried tears of joy together when she received the offer. The thought of her resigning without warning made no sense. Sarah had been excited about balancing her career with her new life, so something was definitely wrong. What do I do now? I whispered to myself, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Should I visit Richard's house again? What would I even expect to find? A part of me wondered if I should contact the police, but the other part hesitated. Would they take me seriously? 2 days after I learned about Sarah's resignation, a chilling event unfolded. It was the middle of the night, and the doorbell rang, shattering the silence. My heart raced. Who could it be at 2 a.m.? I wondered, suspicion creeping into my mind. Peeking at the intercom screen, I squinted into the dark. The figure was familiar. It looked like Sarah. I rushed to the door, my heart pounding as I threw it open. "Sarah?" I exclaimed, my relief mingling with worry. "What happened?" "I've been so worried." But the joy of seeing her was short-lived. The sight of her face made my heart sink. It was swollen and covered in bruises, a grotesque reflection of the daughter I once knew. "What on earth happened to you?" I cried, unable to contain my horror. Sarah trembled and burst. Richard's father glared at me, but I stood my ground. Sarah stood beside me, her cheeks still swollen, bandages covering her wounds, looking utterly defeated. The sight of her suffering seemed to stir something in them, and they reluctantly led us into the house. Once inside, however, their facade crumbled. Richard's mother glared at Sarah, her disdain evident. "We were just disciplining her a bit because she wasn't working properly," she sneered, as if Sarah were a misbehaving child rather than her daughter-in-law. My blood boiled. "What are you saying? Richard, didn't you promise to make my daughter happy?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. Richard's face twisted into a cold expression. "Well, that was on the condition that she fulfilled her role as a wife properly," he retorted, his tone devoid of any empathy. "She was too preoccupied with her job. That's why I submitted her resignation letter for her." My heart dropped at his words. Sarah hadn't quit her job voluntarily. Richard had taken that choice away from her without a second thought. Sarah's tears flowed freely as she explained how she hadn't realized what was happening until it was too late. Richard didn't like that Sarah was working hard, and he felt threatened by her independence. "That's not my concern. If she can't balance both, she is to quit," Richard said coldly, as if his words were justified. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "She can't do a single household chore properly." Richard's father chimed in, attacking Sarah alongside his son. My daughter's shoulders shook with the weight of their accusations, and I felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness for her. "If that's the case, couldn't you have supported her?" I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. Richard's mother crossed her arms defiantly. "When I came here as a bride, I was made to do everything and told to learn through experience," she snapped, as if her struggles somehow justified the abuse they were inflicting on Sarah. Richard's father nodded in agreement. "It's just generational change," he said, dismissing Sarah's plight. "I was watching over her properly," he added, trying to portray himself as a caring figure. Their attempt to downplay the situation made my blood boil. It was clear they had pushed all the housework onto Sarah while indulging in their ignorance felt unbearable, and I knew I had to take a stand for my daughter. "You're both delusional if you think this is how a family should treat each other," I exclaimed, feeling the anger boiling inside me. Sarah had not only lost her job, but she was also losing herself in this toxic environment. I looked at her, my heart breaking for the daughter I knew, the one who had been vibrant and ambitious. "Sarah, we're getting you out of here. You deserve so much better than this," I declared, determination coursing through me. I would not allow them to continue treating her like a slave. It was time to fight back and reclaim her life from the clutches of Richard and his family. The battle was far from over, but I would do everything in my power to protect my daughter. Together, we would rise against the darkness that had invaded her life. The revelation of what had happened to Sarah sent shockwaves through me. It became painfully clear that Richard and his parents had taken control of her life in ways I could never have imagined. They had even taken her phone, effectively isolating her from the outside world and ensuring she could not reach out to me for help. When I visited their home, it felt as if I were stepping into a prison. They had restrained her, preventing her from leaving, as if she were some kind of property rather than their daughter-in-law. Sarah had clung to the hope that Richard would eventually change, that he would see the error of his ways and help her rather than abuse her. But those hopes were dashed. Instead, the treatment from her in-laws only escalated. They made her eat leftovers, dismissing her hunger with cruel comments about wasting gas if they were to drive out for food. They restricted her access to basic necessities, allowing her only a trickle of water for showers, as if conserving resources was more important than her well-being. One day, unable to bear it any longer, Sarah stood her ground. "This isn't right," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with anger. The moment those words left her lips, everything changed. Her objection led to a horrific series of events, resulting in injuries that marred her body and spirit. In response to her defiance, they slapped her hard across the cheek and labeled her insolent. But the physical abuse didn't stop there. They claimed they would re-educate her, taking turns beating her mercilessly, leaving her bruised and broken. Fearing for her life, Sarah waited for a moment when all three of her tormentors were sound asleep before she fled their house. She walked for over an hour, barely escaping with her life, until she finally reached my doorstep. My heart ached at the thought of how she had been treated, how the people who were supposed to love and care for her had turned into her captors. Before the wedding, they had treated Sarah like a precious daughter. Now, they had twisted her into something unrecognizable. When I confronted them, my tone was strong, demanding answers. The three of them exchanged glances, their eyes gleaming with something sinister. From the beginning, I just wanted a wife who would obey me, Richard said nonchalantly, as if this were a casual remark rather than a chilling confession. I thought Sarah would make a good servant, his mother chimed in, saying Sarah was really disappointing. Well, she must have learned her lesson from this incident. Why don't we give her another chance? Richard's father suggested with a smirk. Their casual cruelty infuriated me. I felt the heat of anger rising from deep within, burning away any restraint. Sarah, standing beside me, looked at them with a mix of disbelief and fury. How dare you speak to us like that, she said, her voice trembling with rage. As Richard moved to grab Sarah, I quickly sprang into action, immobilizing him with a swift move that caught him off guard. He struggled against my grip, but I held him down, feeling the years of wrestling training kick in. I hadn't mentioned it before, but I had nearly made it to the Olympics in wrestling when I was younger. An injury had derailed my dreams. Now, however, I felt empowered, channeling that strength to protect my daughter. Richard flailed beneath me, tears streaming down his face as I increased the pressure. When I finally released him, he slumped against the floor, utterly defeated. How pathetic, I scoffed, looking down at him. Now, who should I deal with next? I cracked my knuckles slowly, turning my attention to his parents, who were frozen in shock. Please stop, they cried, covering their heads as they trembled. Their facade of confidence shattered, revealing the fear they had instilled in Sarah. I sent my daughter off, wishing for her happiness. But I will never forgive you for putting her through this, I said, my voice low and firm. Richard, please divorce me, Sarah said, following my lead as she presented the divorce papers to him. What are you talking about? I absolutely won't divorce you, Richard protested, his face turning crimson with rage. This morning, I took my daughter to the hospital and obtained a medical certificate for her injuries, I stated, feeling a surge of confidence. I've also filed a police report. We have no fault in this, so we'll fight this to the end. I looked each of them in the eye, watching their expressions shift from arrogance to sheer panic. They began to sweat profusely, stammering about their reputation, desperately trying to salvage their dignity. Sarah, filled with disgust, reiterated her desire for a divorce. I want a divorce as soon as possible, she insisted, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding us. I look forward to seeing what happens to you now. You'd better regret what you've done, I added, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. As we gathered Sarah's belongings, we headed toward the entrance, ready to leave their toxic environment behind. Wait, we heard Richard's pitiful voice call out from behind us. But Sarah and I walked out of that house without looking back. After that fateful confrontation, the divorce process moved quickly. Sarah successfully finalized her divorce and claimed $50,000 in compensation from Richard. The police report was taken seriously, and the three of them were summoned for questioning. Although they were released soon after, I learned that the police also inspected their home, an event that quickly became the talk of the neighborhood. The whispers and gossip followed them like a shadow, and for the first time, Richard and his parents were viewed with suspicion rather than admiration. When Sarah shared her experiences with her former colleagues, the news spread like wildfire, reaching Richard's company. His client's reputation was at stake, and as a result, he was removed from the fast track to promotion, a consequence of his actions finally catching up with him. Meanwhile, Sarah began to heal both mentally and physically in the safety of our home. I watched her slowly regain her strength, her spirit rekindling with each passing day. She began looking for new job opportunities, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. As for me, my life was far from over. In fact, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had started training again, eager to immerse myself in wrestling once more. The fire within me was reignited, and I was determined to not only reclaim my dreams, but also to stand as a strong role model for Sarah. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I was ready to face it head-on. I would not let my daughter suffer any longer at the hands of those who had betrayed her trust. Together, we would rise from the ashes of our past and forge a new path filled with hope, resilience, and strength. Sarah was free now, and with that freedom came the opportunity to reclaim her happiness. She was no longer just my daughter, she was a warrior, and I would stand beside her every step of the way.